July 1944. Somewhere west of St. Lo, the Norman bocage swallows a man whole. He has been lying behind this hedgerow since before dawn, moss and fern woven into a gilly so complete that from 10 feet away he isn't a soldier, he's undergrowth. His name is Matthias Vogler. His rifle is a Carabiner 98K, fitted with a ZF-41 scope, resting on a folded canvas square to keep the dust out. And in about 90 seconds he is going to be dead, killed by a method his instructors never warned him about, and never understood. Keep that in mind, because here's the question I want you to answer in the comments before the video tells you. This man fires exactly one shot, from cover, and never shows himself again. So how did the Americans find him? Drop your theory below. I promise, the real answer is stranger than whatever you're about to guess. Folded against his chest is an unfinished letter to his mother. One rule matters more to him than any other, taught by the Eastern Front in blood. Fire once, then vanish. It has kept him alive for 3 years. It is about to fail him in under a minute. And to understand why, we have to go back and meet two men who never knew the other existed. The American becomes visible at the edge of the next field around mid-morning. A radio man by the look of him, the long whip antenna, the way he leans into the handset like he's arguing with it. Vogler takes his time. The wind is almost nothing. 200 meters. He breathes out, holds, and fires once. The radio man drops. And now, by every rule his instructors ever hammered into him, Vogler's work is done. Time to fold the canvas. Slip back through the hedge. Find a new hide, 200 meters to the left. Exactly the way he was taught. Exactly the way that kept him alive through 3 winters in the East. The Americans will respond, they always do, but by the time their response arrives, he intends to be a memory. He starts folding the canvas. His hands know the motion without needing his eyes. He's done it 100 times, in mud and snow and worse. He gets maybe halfway before he hears it. Not the crack of a rifle, not the stutter of a machine gun hosing blind fire into the hedge. Something heavier, something dropping, almost lazily, out of the sky above him. He has perhaps 4 seconds before the first 60mm mortar round finds the hedgerow. 4 seconds to ask a question his training never prepared him to answer. He fired once. He never showed himself twice. By every rule he was taught, the Americans should still be out there, squinting at empty ground, spending long minutes organizing a response he'd already be gone from. So how did they know? 2 years before the hedgerow, before the gilly and the letter folded against his chest, Matthias Vogler was a farm boy from Lower Saxony with dirt under his nails and no idea what a scoped rifle even felt like. Conscription found him in the autumn of 1942, the way it found most of them, a paper in the mail, a train east, a uniform that didn't quite fit yet. The Eastern Front taught him what real war was, and it taught him fast. He wasn't there long before someone noticed his hands didn't shake and his eyes didn't blink at the wrong moment. And command put him in front of a man named Feldwebel Ernst Haas, a marksman with 3 campaign ribbons and a stare that made new recruits forget how to breathe. Haas didn't teach rifles. He taught disappearance. Fire once, then vanish. Never let the enemy learn your position twice, because the second time, they'll be ready. He said it so often that Vogler started hearing it in his sleep. Haas had survived on that rule for 2 years against Soviet snipers who were, by every account, better trained and better equipped. Vogler believed every word of it, because Haas was still breathing, and men who didn't believe it generally weren't. Then, in the spring of 1943, outside a nameless village nobody bothered to remember afterward, Haas broke his own rule. Just once. He stayed a few seconds too long to confirm a kill he was already certain of. A mortar round found him before he'd taken 3 steps. Vogler wasn't there to see it. He only heard about it secondhand, the way soldiers hear about the deaths that matter most. And from that day forward, the rule stopped being a lesson to him. It became a debt. 4,000 miles from any hedgerow, a different kind of soldier was fighting a different kind of battle. Fort Sill, Oklahoma, the early 1930s. No mortars, no mud, just a dusty classroom and a director of gunnery named Carlos Brewer, who had convinced himself the entire United States Army was aiming its guns the wrong way. For 100 years, artillery had been aimed the way a hunter aims a shotgun. Eyeball it, adjust by feel, fire, and hope. Brewer thought that absurd, for an army that owned maps and could do arithmetic. His idea was almost insultingly simple. Fix every gun's position by survey. Give every officer the same coordinate grid. Call a target not by pointing at a hill, but by a number on a chart, and let a firing table, not a gut feeling, decide where the shell landed. Most of the army thought it was a curiosity, the kind of thing a few odd men in Oklahoma tinkered with because the Depression had left them nothing better to do. There was no budget to speak of, and no glory in it. Nobody pins a medal on a man for inventing a filing system. Brewer and his small team built it anyway, refining it year after year through the 1930s, on almost nothing, teaching it to whichever young officers would sit still long enough to learn something, with no rifle attached to it. He never met a German sniper. He never set foot in Normandy. He had no reason to think about hedgerows, or gillies, or a farm boy from Lower Saxony learning, an ocean away, to disappear after one shot. But somewhere in that patient, unglamorous work was the answer to a question nobody had thought to ask yet. Vogler never knew there had once been a German sniper tradition worth inheriting, because by the time he was born there wasn't one. The last generation of German marksmen had done what marksmen everywhere did in 1918. They went home, hung up their scoped rifles, and let the whole craft quietly die. The Treaty of Versailles finished the job, capping the army at 100,000 men and leaving no room for a specialty nobody in Berlin thought they'd need again. So when the Eastern Front started bleeding German units white under the patience of Red Army snipers, the Wehrmacht wasn't rebuilding a tradition. It was building one from nothing, in a hurry. In the middle of a war it was already losing ground in. Sniper schools went up across Germany, Austria, Hungary, Lithuania, taught by combat veterans who'd learned their lessons the same brutal way Haas had. Vogler's course ran 4 weeks. Ballistics, weather correction, hide construction, and the discipline Haas had already drilled into him twice as hard as any instructor could. But the test that decided whether you graduated wasn't really about the rifle at all. A candidate had to stalk to within range of an instructor team, take a simulated shot, and then get out without being seen. Fail the escape, fail the course. It didn't matter if the shot was perfect. Vogler remembers the instructor's exact words, delivered flatly, like a man reading a sentence he'd said 1,000 times before. A sniper who can't vanish is worthless to anyone, including himself. He passed. He crawled through 800 meters of frozen mud to prove it, and he never once thought the lesson would need relearning on a different continent, against a different kind of enemy entirely. By 1944, Brewer's shoestring idea from the Depression had become the deadliest artillery network on the planet, and it had nothing to do with hunting snipers. It was built for something bigger and blunter, mass. Call in a target, and every battery in range could lay its guns on the same coordinate and fire at the same instant, so every shell landed in the same second. They called it time on target, and German gunners in Italy learned to flinch at the sound of an American radio before they even heard the first round land. But the part that mattered for a man like Vogler wasn't the heavy guns at all. It was what the system did to the small ones. The same coordinate grid, the same forward observer procedure that called down a battalion of howitzers could just as easily call down a single 60mm mortar sitting a couple hundred meters behind the line. Nobody designed it that way on purpose. It was simply wired into every rifle company, because the FDC didn't care what size the gun was, only that it was in the network. Nobody in Normandy set out to build a counter-sniper weapon. American officers were losing men to snipers faster than anyone anticipated, and somewhere in the chaos of the bocage, a sergeant with a radio and a grid reference realized he already had a way to answer, fast, without ever seeing the man who'd fired. He just had to stop asking where the shot came from and start asking what patch of ground it had to have come from. It wasn't cleverness. It was a system built for one job, quietly discovering it was good at another. Vogler's orders came in June, and they read like a promotion nobody wanted. Transfer west, to a peninsula in France he'd never heard mentioned in any briefing that mattered. The Eastern Front had taught him mud and patience. Normandy taught him something new in the first week alone. The bocage wasn't just terrain. It was a maze built by centuries of farmers who'd never once considered they were laying out a killing ground for the future. Hedge after hedge of packed earth and root, each one its own small fortress. The Americans were dying in numbers nobody back east would have believed. Some companies lost half their strength crossing less than 1,000 yards in a single day, and a brutal share of it came down to men like Vogler, doing exactly what they'd been trained to do. Officers picked out by their map cases and the way they gestured to a column, radio operators marked by their antennas, medics hunted despite the red cross on their arm, because killing one broke a squad's nerve faster than killing anyone else. Forward observers, given away by binoculars they couldn't do their job without. At Bradley's headquarters, the reports climbed the chain with the same two words attached, over and over: sniper fire. It wasn't a nuisance anymore. It was a crisis with a name. Vogler didn't read the reports, obviously. He only knew what he could feel, that the rule Haas had died proving was working exactly as promised. Fire once, vanish. He'd done it in the East against snipers better trained than anything America had fielded, and he was still breathing. Confidence, in a man like Vogler, wasn't arrogance. It was evidence. And evidence, in July of 1944, was about to stop meaning what it used to. Before dawn, in the wet gray light that comes before a Norman morning decides what kind of day it will be, Vogler settles into the hedge and lets his body go still the way Haas taught him, one muscle group at a time, until stillness stops being effort and starts being nothing at all. The letter is where it always is, folded twice against his chest, 3 sentences finished and a 4th one that won't come. He's been trying to write his mother something true about the war without frightening her, and 3 weeks in the bocage have taught him that the two things might not be possible at the same time. He lets himself think, just for a moment, about how long this can go on. Not the war in general. He's stopped being able to picture that. Just this hedgerow, this morning, this particular stretch of France that seems to eat men the way the Eastern Front once ate months. He doesn't let the thought stay long. Haas never let doubt sit still either. And doubt, more than any bullet, was the thing that got men killed slow. Then the American appears at the edge of the far field. Antenna. Handset. The unmistakable shape of a man who thinks he's safe because nobody's fired yet. Vogler doesn't think about the letter anymore, or his mother, or the 4th sentence. There's only the wind, near enough to nothing to ignore, and the 200 meters between them, and the long, practiced exhale that ends with his finger already moving before his mind finishes deciding. The shot leaves the barrel exactly the way 10,000 hours of training built it to. Clean, certain, already, in his own mind, finished. Late in the summer of 1944, a set of documents landed on desks at German Army High Command that should have changed the rest of the war for them. Translations, prepared by military intelligence, of captured American field manuals describing the fire direction system in full, the coordinate grids, the firing tables, the role of the forward observer, the radio procedures, laid out step by step, like a recipe anyone could follow. The officers reading it didn't believe it. Not the translation, the substance. A system this centralized, they reasoned, simply couldn't survive contact with real combat. Field manuals described the ideal. War is chaos. No army actually runs a procedure like this under fire, shell after shell, day after day, without it collapsing into improvisation, the way every army eventually did. The Americans, they decided, had to be doing something else, something the documents weren't showing. They weren't hiding anything. The Americans were doing precisely what the manual said, because the manual wasn't an ideal, it was a habit, drilled into thousands of forward observers who'd never fought any other way. The deeper reason the Germans couldn't accept it wasn't stupidity, it was architecture. The Wehrmacht was built on Auftragstaktik, mission command, handing a task down and trusting the man on the ground to solve it with whatever he had in hand. It made them fast and lethal in 1940. But it meant no German platoon leader could reach past his own guns to borrow fire from anyone else's. Even if High Command had believed every word of what they'd captured, there was no German equivalent of a man with one radio who could call and receive every gun within reach. They hadn't just lost a weapon. They'd lost a war they didn't know they were already losing. Back to the hedgerow, one last time, except now every piece of it makes sense. 200 meters back, a sergeant who never saw Vogler and never needed to, picks up a sound-powered telephone. He heard the crack, he saw the man drop, and that's a bearing, not a mystery. He calls the mortar section and gives them 6 digits and one word: sniper. The crew has been sitting beside that tube since before dawn, registered on this exact stretch of hedge, waiting for a call they hoped wouldn't come. No calculating from scratch. They adjust, they drop the round, and the first shell is in the air before Vogler has finished folding his canvas. 4 rounds in 8 seconds. each one throwing fragments 30 meters out, blanketing a box 50 meters long and 15 wide. Vogler, who has crawled maybe 5 meters by the time the first one lands, was never once outside it. Nobody found him. Nobody needed to. They filled the ground he had to be standing on, and the ground did the rest. Afterward, a soldier clearing the hedge finds one thing intact. A folded letter, 3 sentences finished. A fourth that never came. Addressed to a mother in a Lower Saxony village she'd wait the rest of her life to hear from again. Nobody remembers the sergeant's name, the gunners, or the man at Fort Sill who drew the first grid a decade before any of them were born. They built something that could erase a man like Vogler without ever learning who he was. If this story moved you, hit like. It helps more people find it. And if someone in your family fought through the Bocage, the Hurtgen, or the Bulge, tell me about them below. Their stories deserve to outlast this one.